Thanks, Eddie. Really, there we go. No, no worries. That's the timing on that is invariably awkward. Um, really, really appreciate the invitation to speak to your community, Eddie, and I'm really like grateful to be here, and grateful to have my colleague Jeremy on with us as well. So if it's okay, I'm going to dive in and chatter for a few minutes to kind of give an overview of who we are and what we're doing and why, and then we'll open it up for questions and conversation. Um, so I'll say this is a little bit of an unusual venue for me and us because most of our work is we think of as sort of B to B to C. We mostly work with engaging civil society organizations as a way of connecting with their stakeholders and members. But Uriel Tzedek is a close partner, and Rabbi Yanklowitz has been my teacher and friend for 20 years. So I really wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to share our work directly with Uriel Tzedek's members and hopefully engage in some conversation with the folks that are on the call. So I'm going to do three things over the next few minutes. First is I'm going to talk about why American democracy matters so much to American Jews. Second, I'm going to talk about what we're doing about it at A More Perfect Union. And then third, I'm going to share some thoughts about what you at Uriel Tzedek and what your members can do in response to those needs. So we at A More Perfect Union start from the premise that Jews have it better in America than we've had it anywhere else in the diaspora in the last 2,000 years. This country represents the first time in history in which Jews are no more interlopers than anyone else. We arrived on these shores. There was no kind of ancien regime. There was no king or sovereign from whom we needed to beg as kind of appeal to as supplicants or from whom we needed to beg favor. And even though we've been struggling since the beginning to kind of live up to our best aspirations, when we're at our best, America elevates diversity and pluralism as intrinsic values. We are one people among many. We even have in this country the miracle of Article 6 baked right into the Constitution before the First Amendment, even that says, quote, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. It's the first time in human history when a country was founded with a principle of religious neutrality to all of the people who inhabit it. That's a profound thing that I think we often lose sight of. So democratic norms and institutions like Article 6 and like the First Amendment make American Judaism possible. We've built in this country synagogues and community centers, social service agencies, day schools, summer camps, Jewish film festivals, vegan advocacy groups. You may have heard of some of those. Arts collectives, farming communities, 12-step groups, publishing companies, the Jewish Braille Institute, like extraordinary network of civil society organizations. I think more than 7,500 Jewish nonprofits that ensure rich, vibrant, and diverse Jewish life in this country. And I think it's important to name that the democratic norms and institutions that make that civil society possible are as important for the ultra-Orthodox Jewish right as they are for the secular Jewish left. They're as important for the Orthodox Jewish left as they are for the secular Jewish conservatives. Like the whole community, our whole community, and all the things that we fight about with each other, LGBTQ rights, egalitarianism, religious freedom, Israel, religious schools, public schools, all of those things happen inside of a container, a democratic container in which we can engage in those conflicts in relative safety and security and without fear of existential consequences. And that is sui generis. That is a thing that has never existed, that did not ever exist before these United States were established. That being said, democracy is at terrible risk in this country right now. Not unique risk. We have faced serious threats to democracy before in this country. The Civil War, a deep flirtation with fascism in the 1930s, an eruption of serious political violence in the 1960s. Those are episodes of serious precarity that our democracy has navigated and survived in the past. But this is pretty bad. We have an experience of enforced ideological conformity happening in different communities around the country, both in the form of cancel culture and in the form of book banning, right? Places where people are trying to enforce a kind of groupthink around ideological questions. We have increasing levels of toxic polarization. There's a study that came out in 2020 that said only 3.5% of Americans are willing to vote for someone of the opposing party to protect democracy, meaning they'd rather vote for someone from their party who threatens democracy than someone from the other party who supports it. We've got a catastrophic collapse in local media. We're on track to lose about a third of the newspapers that we had in 2005 by the end of 2024. So 20 years, we're going to lose a third of our newspapers. Huge correlation between local newspapers and voting rights. So if a community has a local newspaper, people in that community are much more likely to vote. And if they don't have a newspaper, there's much more risk of corruption in the local government. There are efforts to restrict voting rights, huge spread of mis and disinformation, erosion of democratic norms like forbearance and the concession after elections are lost. And probably most concerning is an increasing willingness on both sides of the political spectrum to consider violence as a political tool. So these things pose real challenges for America in general, and I would say for us in particular as Jews. Authoritarianism and anti-Semitism are very old bedfellows. So what are we doing about it at a more perfect union? We're essentially doing three things. First is we're recruiting Jewish institutional partners, civil society organizations, nonprofits, synagogues, day schools, Jewish summer camps, JCCs, et cetera, to make concrete commitments to engage in pro-democracy activity. When we launched in 2022, we recruited 77 partners to work specifically on ensuring free and fair elections. Together, they recruited hundreds of poll workers and poll watchers. They built relationships with local election officials. And by the end of 2022, our partners had recruited 5% of the lawyers that work with this network called the Election Official Legal Defense Network that provides pro bono legal support for election officials who are experiencing harassment and intimidation. So since then, we've expanded our focus to encompass several additional priorities. We now have three major priorities, things that we think the Jewish community is really well positioned to respond to. One is civic learning, like how do we use Jewish educational platforms and venues to do civics education in America? I'll give you some examples of some of the commitments that have shown up there. Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, which is the largest Reform synagogue in Texas, has adopted a commitment to give Bima honors to members of its congregation who do public service. So if a congregant works as a poll worker, they will get an aliyah. If a congregant completes a service on a jury, they'll get an aliyah. If they complete a tour of military duty, they'll get an aliyah. It's a way of like educating the synagogue community about the importance of civic service in the life of the congregation. Another example is the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, which is developing a course on Jewish habits of the heart in a democracy. So those are some examples of civic learning commitments among some of our partners. We have other partners that are working on free and fair elections. That's another major priority. Congregation Oheb Shalom in Reading, Pennsylvania. Its commitment is to offer up its building as a polling site on election day. Another is the commitment that the JCRC of Greater Phoenix made last year, and Eddie and I were able to kind of join in supporting this commitment directly. The JCRC of Greater Phoenix invited 40 clergy from around the Phoenix area to tour the Maricopa County Election Department in December of 2023 as a way of learning how elections operate in Maricopa County, which is the largest contested county in America, and also a hotbed of election denialism and the Stop the Steal movement. And then those clergy, Jewish and non-Jewish, kind of were sent back out into their communities to serve as trusted ambassadors of confidence in elections. So we're working with the JCRC in Greater Phoenix to help them kind of genericize or build a playbook out of that program so that other JCRCs can run similar programs. And then our third kind of strategic priority area is around promoting pluralism. And I think a great example of this work is a partnership we have with Leading Edge, which does leadership training for leaders of Jewish organizations. They're developing a guide to help leaders of Jewish nonprofits navigate political polarization among their staffs. So what do you do as a Hillel executive director if you have staff who hold very different positions on Israel? What do you do as a JCC executive director if you have staff who are supporting a Republican candidate for president and a Democratic candidate for president and bringing those politics into the workplace? So that's the first thing we do. We recruit partners to make commitments, and then we support them to succeed. The second thing we do is we're working to build a kind of a trust-based network among all of our partners across political and ideological lines, across sectoral lines, and across denominational lines. We're doing that because, well, for a lot of reasons, actually. We're doing that, number one, because we believe in civil society. We believe in the value that nonprofit organizations play in the context of a democracy. Alexis de Tocqueville, 200 years ago, visited America, and the thing that he was probably most blown away about in the context of America was our civil society. We had this whole other thing that wasn't government and wasn't business. It was nonprofits. They weren't called nonprofits at the time. They were called voluntary associations, but they were like entities that brought citizens together to work on problems that they encountered in their communities. And he saw that as American democracy's greatest superpower. So we really believe in that. The second is that we believe that a network of civil society organizations working together is one of our best backstops against democratic backsliding. Right? We entrust democracy in our government, and governments sometimes slip up or backslide or flirt with authoritarianism. And when that happens, civil society is the best remedy. It's the best hedge. And this is based on research going back 100 years of democracies around the world that have been in states of precarity. The ones that have been most able to kind of pull themselves back from the brink are the ones that have robust civil societies that are well organized and willing to partner with each other to protect democracy. And I'd say the third reason we're focused on the civil society and particularly building relationships among civil society organizations that have political, ideological, and denominational differences is that same research base that talks about how networks of civil society organizations can help protect and prevent kind of democratic backsliding says that the ones that are most successful bring together people who have strong differences with each other around policies they care about. They may be pro-life and pro-choice. They may be isolationist and interventionist. They may be pro-welfare state and anti-tax, whatever those things are, those differences, combining people who have those differences but are willing to set them aside to defend democracy also turns out to be a critical success factor for civil society networks in preventing democratic backsliding. So that's an essential part of our work, and I think part of the reason that our partnership with Real Aesthetic is so important. The third strategy we have is narrative change, right? It's about telling a story to the Jewish community and from the Jewish community about the role that faith communities in general and the Jewish community in particular can play in protecting and strengthening democracy. That's not a story that's kind of self-evident to people. It's one that people need to be reminded of, and we're doing our best to kind of highlight the work that our partners are doing in a way that can reinforce that message and the importance of the Jewish community's work on this front. So I'm going to pivot now to like a close about what you can do, what you members of Real Aesthetic can do. And I'm going to be a little disappointing at first because I'm going to say there aren't any simple solutions. It has taken us a couple of decades to land in the place that we are around democracy in America, and in fact, democracy globally. There's an organization called Freedom House that tracks the health of democracies around the country, around the world. And it's been tracking that since 1950, give or take, shortly after the Second World War. And democracies were like booming. They were a really good investment between 1950 and about 2004. Starting in 2004, democracies around the world and the number of people kind of living in democracies around the world plateaued for about 4 years. And starting in 2008, democracies have been in decline. you would have made good money betting against democracy since 2008. So we're like 16 years into a democratic decline around the world, and there isn't like a quick fix. There isn't a postcard you can send or a phone call you can make to stop that problem. And we're in it for the long haul, and we are like part of a network of pro-democracy organizations that know that thing and are like willing to put in time and energy in partnership with organizations like yours. So what can you do? I'd say the first and most important thing is to encourage the leadership at Jewish institutions that you're affiliated with to become partners of ours by making institutional commitments. Those institutional commitments, as I talked about a minute ago, have immediate benefit for the kind of the democratic health and vitality of the communities in which your institutions, your organizations are embedded. And they give us an opportunity to do that network building and relationship building and trust building that we believe is going to be essential to democracy's survival over the long term. Protecting and strengthening democracy isn't a transactional one-off thing that we can focus on only in even-numbered years, let alone in the 10 weeks between Labor Day and Election Day, which is kind of where Americans wake up and they're like, oh yeah, I'm in a democracy. We really need a network of civil society organizations that are working on these issues day in and day out, year after year over the long term. We want to be the catalyst for that work in the Jewish community, and we need as many partners as possible to make that real. We're all about network effects, right? The more partners, and those partners will matter. Regardless of how that turns out, and regardless of whether you're able to get traction in your institutions, and we'll work with Eddie to share information with all of you about how to do that. We'll also send out a link to a page on our website that has like specific examples that individuals can take, things that will matter just for you as an individual. Those things include volunteering to serve as a poll worker. It takes, and this even every time I mention this statistic, it kind of blows my mind. It takes 1 million people to run a federal election every 2 years in this country. That's like an astonishing number of people. 1/3% of the entire US population is involved in just running the election. So we'll share this. Oh, Jeremy just shared this link in the chat, but we'll send it in an email following up as well. So volunteering to serve as a poll worker, hugely important. Second is joining Rumor Guard, which is a partnership that we have that gives our partners and their members the tools to push back against mis and disinformation, right? This is a role that individuals can play. Mis and disinformation is rife in the social media sector, and luckily people showing up in the social media sector can push back against it. Third is you can sign up for a structured and supported conversation with someone from the opposing political party. We've got a partnership with Braver Angels that allows people to do that. It's a way to like test your own ability to be in relationship with someone who may hold positions on policy issues that are in opposition to the ones you hold, but who shares an interest in like building their own skill set about how to have those conversations respectfully and with with civility. A skill that I think we are all like a muscle that we're all a little weak on and could build our skills around. The Get Involved website that Jeremy just sent around also will give you an opportunity, if you're a lawyer, to sign up to offer pro bono legal support for election officials who are facing harassment and intimidation. We do that work through our partnership with the Election Official Legal Defense Network. You can also sign up to stay in the loop about other opportunities that we're continually surfacing for people to participate in protecting democracy. And of course, if you are so inclined, you can make a donation to help support our work. Then there's things you can do on your own. You can organize a pro-democracy book group. You can volunteer on a political campaign. You can get involved in participatory budgeting if your community offers that. If you have kids, you can ask the schools your kids attend about how they teach civics. Answer, like, spoiler alert, most of them don't. We've been in a generation-long decline in civics education in this country, and that's something that needs to be remedied. I'd say all of these things matter because civic engagement begets civic engagement. So the more you do, the more you'll do, and the more you'll be in a position to help your friends and family members and colleagues do things. So I'll close here by saying something that I say a lot. The Jewish community alone isn't going to save democracy. We're going to need Asian American Pacific Islanders and evangelicals and the LGBTQ community and veterans and Muslims and farmers all standing arm in arm. But we, as the Jewish community, have to do our part. There's a lot of work to do, and it's going to take all of us. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions. Eddie, I'm happy to do whatever you want.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we had a group of folks already send us in some questions, and we're actually getting
Great.
some questions right now. So we'll go ahead
Fantastic.
and start off with those. One of the very first questions we received is, how do you battle misinformation within your own community? Especially in synagogues, I feel like there's so much misinformation about voting rights happening here and now. How do we combat this?
So this is like there's a ton of research that has gone into this particular challenge. I think signing up with RumorGuard is a really good tool for managing this. RumorGuard both like monitors the disinformation landscape and also provides tools to help people push back against it. There's considerable research that says that like relationships are the like necessary precondition for effective pushback on mis and disinformation. So leaning into trust-based relationships is like a critical piece of the pie, a critical piece of the puzzle. And being yourself armed with really good like information that you feel confident about is another critical piece of it. And I'd say, again, I think the research is pretty clear on this. Not getting into the kind of back and forth like mudslinging of the whole thing, and instead like doing a good job of like listening and trying to understand where the people who are sharing the mis and disinformation got it from, understanding how they're approaching it, what their underlying biases are, and appealing to those. And that's like this is very, very hard, and it's slow, and it's not we don't have like perfect tools for these things yet. We're kind of developing and learning as we go. But I'd say all of those things are tools that people can bring to bear.
This one's a little controversial, but I'll go ahead and read it.
Yeah.
One of our folks is asking, how do you see Israel dividing the vote within our community? Do you expect folks to show up even bigger, or do you expect folks to abstain from voting this season?
Yeah. Um, Look, I'll say, what am I going to say? Uh, I think Israel post October 7th is introducing. I'm not going to talk about what's happening in Israel and like the dimensions of that conflict and the war. I think like sort of out of scope for where we focus our attention. What I'll talk about is what I think the implications of it might be for American democracy. Um, I think one of the features of pro-democracy work over the last 8 or so years, last 8 or 10 years, when there have been significant authoritarian threats from the Republican Party in particular, electorally, right? I think there are also, and I can enumerate a number of anti-democratic and illiberal threats on the left. Those things are real. But electorally, the primary threats to democracy are on the political right and affiliated with the Republican Party at the moment, have been for the last, I'd say, 8 years. Um, I think one of the features of the political landscape over that period of time has been that the progressive left and the kind of pro-democracy center have been in a marriage of convenience in response to those electoral threats on the right. And for lots of totally understandable reasons, and I'd say like, for some people on the left, on the progressive left, that's been about policy threats represented by the kind of Republican right. For some people in the center, that's been about threats to democratic norms and institutions. But again, both of them have been sort of focused on the threat presented by the authoritarian right. Since October 7th, there have been real fractures that have emerged in that marriage of convenience, right? There are parts of the progressive movement left who are concerned about the Biden administration's support for Israel. There are parts of the kind of centrist um, Democratic Party that have been concerned about emergent anti-Semitism and the anti-democracy of it on the progressive left and the ways in which the Democratic Party has been navigating and responding or not responding to those things. those conflicts, those fractures, those tensions, I think represent a real challenge for for the pro-democracy community in the 2024 election. And I do not have a crystal ball about how those things are going to play out, but those fractures are a real issue, and I think we're certainly attentive to them and trying to figure out how to navigate them. And we know that many of our partners in the pro-democracy world are wrestling with them also. So that's my sort of analysis about it. It's not dispositive, but I think it's the right thing to be paying attention to, or one of the right things to be paying attention to.
Thank you so much. Some of our teens that have been volunteering with us, they just asked, what can teens do to get involved? Everybody shuts us down since we can't vote.
Well, okay, so I'm not going to shut you down. There are a bunch of things you can do. So number one, I'm blanking on what the word is. Districts, right? There are some like voting districts around the country where teens post 16 can volunteer as to support polling sites, right? They can volunteer to support early voting. They can volunteer to support elections on election day. So that's district by district, but you can certainly check into that. Number one. Number two is you can again this varies by state and by jurisdiction, but there are pre-registration efforts that can happen to make sure that, I have this like fantasy that every Jewish 18-year-old will be registered to vote when they turn 18. In a lot of states, you can pre-register to vote at 17. I think in some states, you can pre-register to vote at 16 so that that thing happens automatically. In some states, and this annoys the heck out of me, you can't pre-register to vote you can't register to vote until you turn 18 or maybe a month beforehand. So voting rates we know are historically much, much lower among people in the 18 to 22 age range, 18 to 24. So teens can uh, organize themselves. They are the most credible messengers with each other to ensure that everyone, all of their peers and friends are registered to vote as soon as possible. That's number two. Number three is there are lots of roles that teens can play in supporting campaigns. And here I'm not like I don't have a partisan dog in this fight at all. As I said before, civic engagement begets civic engagement. So volunteering on a political campaign is a really important and valuable way that young people can get involved in the political process and support democracy in meaningful ways. I'll give four and five, and then I'm going to stop because there's a bunch of other things that'll show up on the get involved. Number four is teens, I would say, are like the one place where none of us should be shutting teens down is in social media misinformation and disinformation monitoring. Y'all are way more native to digital spaces than I am as of tomorrow 52-year-old. So signing up with Rumor Guard and learning how to monitor and respond to misinformation and disinformation online is an incredible place and space for teens to be playing a role. Thank you. And the last one, which I'm blanking on because I said the one thing before I said the other. I'll remember it and I'll come back to it. There's a fifth. There's a fifth thing teens can do, but I'll come back to it.
Thank you so much. We also have another question here.
Yeah,
This one is another spicy question.
I like
How do
I
we
like the
prepare to
Henry ones. I like the spicy ones.
Awesome. How do we prepare to stop another January 6th?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so part of the reason we launched A More Perfect Union is both to be anticipatory of another potential January 6th. Of course, it won't look exactly like that. It might look like something else, but also to be well positioned to respond to it. And when I say that, what I mean is, if you look back after January 6th, there were different parts of the Jewish community that responded to January 6th, different parts of the other faith communities that responded also. And in a lot of cases, those responses were predictable and therefore relatively discountable.
Mm.
So the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism put out a statement that most people in the Reform community looked at it and they were like, yeah, go Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. I imagine, I don't actually, I'm not actually sure about whether this happened, but I imagine that there were Orthodox institutions also that put out statements, and people in the Orthodox community who were so inclined to agree with those statements agreed with them, and neither community really saw each other's stuff or saw it and discounted it in some way because it was like not the thing that they would say, etc. We're hoping that by building the cross-denominational and cross-ideological network that we're trying to build, we'll be better positioned to make statements, take positions, mobilize communities in surprising coalitions that will both shake people out of their kind of information and ideology silos, and also push them to remember and be inclined to partner with people that are surprising allies. So how do we prepare to do it? We build relationships with people with whom we disagree about a lot of things that we really care about. And we are willing to set aside those differences, not like abandon those positions, not at all. Like I'm not advocating for anybody to abandon the positions that they care about, but be willing to partner with people with whom we disagree, in the case where democracy is threatened, and be willing to stand arm in arm with them and say, you know what, I'm going to fight with this person tomorrow, but today I'm going to like go to the barricades to make sure that that we have it tomorrow, right? That we have it tomorrow where we can have those debates. So to my mind, that is the single most important thing that we as individuals, and particularly we as members of institutions, can do.
Thank you so much. Aaron, this is my question.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jewish community, we're great at voting. We have one of the
Oh,
highest statistics at
amazing.
voting.
So
We
good.
show up to the polls each and every time. So, what do you foresee the Jewish community really doing? What is our next step to go far beyond just voting?
Yeah, I think this is a great point. And we've gotten that question like less often of late. Like it is clear the Jewish community shows up. Like we are very, very good at our own voting. And so the question is like, what's the next level of work that we can be doing? So I think number one, as I've now reiterated many times, is how do we as a network of civil society organizations, synagogues, day schools, JCCs, social service agencies, summer camps, etc., um, uh, like embrace like an active commitment to democracy that is not just about getting our members to vote, because, even at our best, we're 2% of the population, and that 2% is spread unevenly around the country. So what does it look like to be a force for democracy that goes beyond what our voting is? And I'll give you a very, very concrete example. When we launched in 2022, as I mentioned, we had this network of 77 partners, and we did a ton of work to protect and strengthen to ensure free and fair elections. We mobilized poll workers. We got Jewish buildings to serve as polling sites. We built relationships with election officials to kind of get their backs in the post January 6th sort of stop the steal environment. And we built a toolkit of ways to do that work. And like we were successful enough, even in our tiny little way, right? 77 Jewish organizations in 16 states, but we were successful enough at testing those things out that in 2023, we partnered with two organizations much larger than ours, Protect Democracy and Interfaith America, who have dozens of staff and represent many, many much larger constituencies. And they took the tools that we had we had piloted, that we'd used in the laboratory of the Jewish community, and white labeled them. And then over the course of the last 6 months, they've distributed them to thousands of churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues. So those institutions can also be involved in ensuring free and fair elections. So I think like the next step for us as a community is, yes, we vote, but there's so much more to democracy than just voting. And in fact, like getting ourselves out of the headspace that democracy only happens again during even numbered years between Labor Day and Election Day. Like that's it's a fallacy and a mistake, and like provides a false sense of confidence. It's like that moment on the roller coaster when like you get past the really scary drop and you're like, oh, everything's going to be okay now. But like democracy happens all the time. It's the work that we have to do. And I remembered the thing that the other thing the teens can do. Um, ask your schools to teach civics, right? Ask your history teacher or your principal to teach civics. And if they have questions about how to do that, have them get in touch with us because we're plugged into a bunch of both Jewish organizations and civics education organizations that are well positioned to do that kind of teaching.
Thank you. We have another question following up that.
Yeah,
Another spicy one. How do we work with other coalitions who have made it unsafe for us? Some progressive civic orgs have said some horrible anti-Semitic things.
yeah. Um, this is another good spicy one and one for which I don't have a simple answer. Um, and the answer I do have is not only not simple, it's also I'll acknowledge that it's a little controversial.
Mm,
Um, I think that we as human beings, for a long time, probably forever, have operated with an assumption that if we expel people, they disappear. It's like a latent, implicit assumption. I think it shows up in the Jewish community in the concepts of like karet and cherem. Like if we push those people out of the community, if we, you know, reject them, they will disappear. They will not be our problem anymore. In the Catholic Church, it's called excommunication. In ancient Athens, it was exile from the city state. It happened to Spinoza. Um, it happens now on social media when we unfriend somebody, right? We think, okay, I've expelled them and they are gone. And I think that that fantasy is fundamentally unsound, because what actually happens, which what the research tells us when we expel people, when we like refuse to sit down with them, and I'm gonna draw an exception around like people who pose a physical threat, right? Like an actual threat of physical danger. When we refuse to sit down with people, when we refuse to engage with people, they tend to find each other and radicalize. And we, when we are no longer in relationship with the people who irritate the hell out of us, scare us, threaten us, also tend to radicalize. And that radicalization, that kind of binary radicalization, um, doesn't serve, doesn't like secure us the safety and security that we imagine it secures for us. So how do we work with other coalitions who have made it unsafe for us? Like if they pose a safety and security threat that is like physical in nature, we should not work with them. And there are like mechanisms through law enforcement, through the Anti-Defamation League, et cetera, that we should pursue in order to protect ourselves from those kinds of threats. Um, when those threats are not physical, or pose like that kind of safety and security threat, I think as much as possible, and for everybody, there's a different line around this, right? I acknowledge that, and I don't again have any like prescriptive test about what this should look like. I think it is in our best interest to find ways to continue to engage with people, even when they feel like awful people who threaten some of the core values that we hold dear. Because I think it is only through that kind of relationship, particularly in this moment when there's so many forces arrayed to try to divide us, that we have hope to like grow our community through persuasion and trust building and relationship building. So I fully acknowledge that that is a controversial thing to say. It is murderously hard for me to sit down in conversation with people who believe and say things that offend me, that feel um, scary for myself, my family, my children, my community. Um, and it's like an edge that I constantly want to be pushing myself on.
And following up on that, with talking about security, how do you foresee coalitions embracing security and really pushing for faith leaders to become poll watchers, to be poll observers? Because we've been hearing a lot of people say that they have credible fear that both from the far left and from the far right, to be able to stop people from voting.
Yeah. Yeah, those are real concerns, and I'll suggest like a few different organizations that I think that are like tackling this problem in serious ways. So obviously from a like hard, I'll call this hard nuts and bolts safety and security standpoint, the Jewish community is like has made a serious investment in a partnership with this organization, the Secure Communities Network, which does a lot of consulting and support for Jewish institutions with physical infrastructure around how to provide security around their work. Like the concrete pylons and things like that. And that is like, God bless them, they do very important and valuable work. Um, I'd say as a complement to that, again, the research suggests that in the long run, the best source of safety and security for communities and people is relationships. Our partners will send this in the maybe Jeremy, you can make a note. We should send the Project OverZero resource to Eddie to share with the real estate community. We've got a close partnership with an organization called Project OverZero that for a long time has been doing excellent research on political violence in the international context, and over the last 6 or 8 years has been bringing that lens to bear in the United States. And their like very, very clear recommendation around how to navigate safety and security issues is to build relationships. Like if you're a synagogue and you have safety and security concerns, build relationships with other houses of worship in your community, build relationships with local law enforcement in your community, build relationships with local elected officials in your community, build relationships with the local Rotary Club or whatever else, because it's those kinds of thick institutional relationships that keep communities resilient in the face of potential violence. Not necessarily preventing, although that also happens, but also responding to and mitigating. And I'll give like one last example about this. I mentioned this congregation Oheb Shalom in Reading, Pennsylvania, that's a partner of ours and has been hosting a polling site in its building for now 2 decades. And one of the like, I found myself incredibly moved by Rabbi Brian Michelson, who's the rabbi there, talking about why they decided to do that, and what impact it has had. He talks about how they had a lot of security concerns when they opened their building to serve as a polling site about, strangers, not members of the synagogue, like walking into the synagogue and voting on election day. This is back in 2002 or 2004 when they started doing it. And not only were those fears like whatever, they were not realized, like they were not actually security concerns, but whatever vestigial anti-Semitism he had like noticed in the community dropped precipitously because people in the community walked into the synagogue and I'm not quoting him here, I'm paraphrasing. They looked around and they're like, oh, just another church, right? Like the sense of openness, the sense of, oh, I had all sorts of ideas about what Jews were. But in fact, here I am in a Jewish building, casting my ballot as an American citizen in a Jewish institution that cares also about American democracy, that also has an American flag inside of it, and that has like welcomed us as members of this community to do this civic thing in this space. He's like, it transformed the relationship that his community had with its surrounding religious communities and other things. And I think that's a paradigmatic example of why this relationship building thing is so important across religious differences, across denominational differences inside the Jewish community, and across political and ideological differences.
Wow, so well said. Thank you so, so much. I know we're getting close to time, and this is something we ask of all of our folks to close us up. One, a message of hope, and two, being Jewish, what is a piece of Torah or Judaism that inspires you to continue this work?
Yeah. What's the sorts of hope? So I'll say I think probably the thing that gives me the most hope is the fact that 125 Jewish organizations in 29 states have like saw fit to add work to their plates, right? Like I have many friends who are rabbis. I have many friends who run Jewish day schools, and God knows they are not looking for new things to do, right? They've got the facilities manager just quit. The ECC classroom has whatever air conditioning is broken. They don't have enough chairs in the sanctuary there, whatever, the capital campaign, blah, blah, blah. And in just a couple of years, day school heads and JCC heads and camp executive directors and so on have said, you know what? Got all these things on my priority list, and this also matters because the survival of American democracy is a precondition for Jewish life in this country, and we're going to take that on. And that even though there are so many things to be concerned about, it gives me an enormous amount of hope. Um, what's the Torah? I can cite Chazal, but actually I'm gonna go back to like a different piece of Torah that's not our scripture, but that I think is a distinct thing about the American Jewish experience. This thing is not that there really is a distinct American Judaism, and it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, it is an extraordinary thing. I will go American Judaism. I will go toe to toe with 15th century Spanish Judaism and 18th century Polish Judaism and 4th century Babylonian Judaism. Like we have got an amazing thing going here. We have built a community of diversity and beauty and profound teaching and Torah. And I like that is a product of the like a syncretic merger between like 3,000 years of serious Torah and 250 years of like the beauty or like our other Torah in this country, the Constitution, the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and Frederick Douglass's "What to a Slave is the Fourth of July" and Langston Hughes' "Let America Be America Again," and like that thing. Somebody needs to write it. Maybe I don't know. Maybe Rabbi Yanklowitz and I, Eddie, we can like write it together. Like, what is that American Jewish Torah? That thing is profound, and it deserves recognition and appreciation and defense and continued perfecting, right? It is not done. We adopted a mission that we need to protect and strengthen American democracy. It is not like this is not about going back to some halcyon age of American Judaism. There's a lot of work to do to make this country the place it needs to be. But democracy is our best hope to get there, and we're like honored to be able to do it in partnership with you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and everybody who's on this call, who's watching both the recording, who will be watching the recording, and those of you who are watching live. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the work of a more perfect union that's really mobilizing so many in the Jewish community to take action to protect our democracy now more than ever, that we truly all need to come together. Huge shout out once more again to a more perfect union and the amazing work that both Aaron's doing, Jeremy, and the rest of his team, because they have such amazing human beings. Make sure to stay up. We will be following up with links for those of you who are asking for them to make sure that you can keep up with everything that's mobilizing. And remember that everybody has an opportunity to create change. Aaron just drafted like 25 different things that all of us can do right now. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have an amazing week. Thank you so much for being with us. Take
Thanks
care.
so much, Eddie. Thanks, everybody. Great to see
Bye
you.
bye.